If something still remains when all thoughts, all emotions, and even the whole world disappear, what is it? Ethan once believed the answer lay in the films he directed where people fought, loved, lost, and found themselves again. But one night, alone in the editing room, the screen black, no sound, no image, only awareness watching awareness, he felt fear. Not fear of the dark, but for the first time, he touched a groundless presence, something that had been there since the day he was born. They call it pure knowing. The ancients called it Brahman, and he began to ask himself, am I truly the director, or just a character that consciousness is temporarily playing? Stay until the end of this story, and perhaps you'll no longer be the one who is watching. Ethan lived beneath the glow of stage lights, the echo of applause, and a chorus of praise. He was a masterful director, not for his technical brilliance, but for his uncanny ability to touch the human heart. Every film he made was a mirror, reflecting both the ache and the beauty of life. And yet, the paradox, he, who crafted journeys of awakening for others, had never truly asked who he was. Most nights, he would sit alone in the editing room, deep into the night, staring at uncut footage, fragmented moments of lives, mirroring the same fragmentation he felt inside. Friends called him a visionary. Audiences hailed him as the storyteller of his generation. But all Ethan could hear was the silent echo of a question left unanswered. Are any of these things even real, or just a well-directed dream? On the outside, he was successful, but inside, he was as blurry as the unfocused frames he kept watching. One early autumn afternoon, Ethan took a walk in the woods on the edge of the city. It was the place he often visited when he needed inspiration for a new script. But this time, no ideas came. Only a single leaf, withered and golden, gently landing in the palm of his hand. He stared at it for a long time. He didn't know why, but the image tightened something deep in his chest. A leaf, once green, once dancing in wind and sunlight, now motionless, dissolving back into the earth. And suddenly, Ethan thought, if life is just a sequence of images, then who is the one watching? There was no soundtrack to this moment, no climax, just a silence so still it felt almost surreal. He went home and opened an old clip he'd filmed, a character dying alone in a forest. But this time, he wasn't watching the character. He was watching the space, the emptiness between the cuts. And for the first time, he felt something was watching through him. Less than a month after the falling leaf moment, Ethan received the news. His father, once a reclusive photographer, had passed away in silence. No will, no farewell, just an old camera and an unsent letter. Ethan returned to the wooden house where his father had spent his final years. No one was there, only the wind whispering through weary window panes, and the still light settling like dust on photographs that had never been displayed. He picked up the camera and realized it had been broken for years. Yet his father had still used it, still taken pictures. The entire room was filled with blank photos. No images, no shadows. In a small corner, Ethan found a piece of paper folded in four, with faint handwriting. My son, sometimes we take pictures, not to capture an image, but to learn how to see without holding on. Ethan broke down, not because he'd lost his father, but because, for the first time, he understood. Consciousness doesn't need to hold onto anything. It simply knows. And perhaps in those blank photos, his father had captured reality itself. After the quiet funeral, Ethan returned to the city. He tried to resume work on his new film, but every scene fell hollow. No character could portray the silence he now carried in his heart. He stopped sleeping, stared blankly at the screen, and sometimes saw his own face dissolve into a blur of pixels. No longer, I am the director. No longer, I am the son. Only a state, without name, without shape. One night, he stood in front of the mirror. The light in the room flickered, bulb fading in and out. And he saw the reflection no longer looked like him. It had no expression, no intention. It was simply looking back at itself. Ethan sank to the floor, back against the wall. No tears, no fear, only a fall into a stillness he had never known. If the self can collapse, then what is it that's still witnessing that collapse? He didn't find an answer, only a bare presence, colorless, nameless, yet undeniably here. Ethan drove back to the mountains where his father had once lived, bringing the old camera, not to take pictures, but simply to be there. He stopped by a small lake at dusk. Mist hovered gently over the water. The whole scene stood still. No voices, no music, no dialogue, only a quiet kind of awareness, as if even the air itself was knowing. He closed his eyes. No prayer, no meditation, just a simple letting go of every effort. And then, something strange unfolded. Ethan no longer felt, I am here. Instead, everything, the grass, the water, the wind, was part of something that was aware of itself. Consciousness was no longer confined to his head. It was everywhere. No boundaries, no container, no owner. And in that moment, no flash of light, no voice from above. A deep, wordless recognition rose from within. This awareness, it is not mine. It is what is. It is Brahman. No one told Ethan that. No one needed to. He had come face to face with what had never once left him, not even for a second since the moment he was born. After that night by the lake, Ethan was no longer the man he used to be, though no one else could tell. He returned to the city, still drank coffee at his usual spot, still walked the same streets. But now, each step wasn't about going somewhere. It was about seeing more deeply into what was walking. He began editing again, but not following any script. He let each scene emerge from silence itself. He didn't rush to cut. He didn't force the emotions to swell. He simply observed. A child sleeping. An old woman arranging wilted flowers. A door opening, then closing. Nothing dramatic, yet everything alive with reality. Ethan didn't call it awakening. He simply knew he had stopped asking, who am I? Because the one who had been asking had dissolved into that very knowing. Now, he lived as though every frame was a living expression of Brahman, and he was no longer the director, just the screen. Ethan's new film, crafted through pure recognition, was released quietly, with no marketing, no media buzz. And yet, within a week, it spread like a gentle breeze. Letters poured in. Critics called it the first awakened work of modern cinema. Ethan read the reviews. You touched something beyond the screen. The film reminded me of what I once was before I had a name. And then very softly, the old self whispered back. That was you, Ethan. You achieved what no one else has. He began thinking about recreating it, about making a sequel, about bringing the message, consciousness is reality, to the whole world. He wanted to share the awakening. But part of him began to see himself as the one who was awake. That subtle feeling, small as a speck of dust, but if unseen, would become a new ego, dressed in robes of mindfulness. Ethan sat in a dark room, staring at the original footage, just a still lake, and he whispered, as a warning to himself, there is no one to awaken, nothing to transmit, no director, only the knowing, reflecting itself. And with that, he let go of even the desire to share truth. After the subtle wave of ego passed through, Ethan didn't resist. He simply breathed and felt the egoless movement of awareness. In every small action, he washed dishes, not to make them clean, but to witness water flowing through his hands. He walked, not to reach a destination, but to listen to the sound of his feet touching the earth. Nothing had changed, and because of that, everything had changed. Ethan no longer thought, I am living consciously. He simply saw that each moment was living itself. He had no need to explain Prajnānam Brahma. He was the Mahāvākya, without words, without concepts. No more cameraman, only light. No more storyteller, only awareness, telling itself in every form. One early morning, as Ethan was walking through the park, a little girl, maybe 7 years old, ran past him, looked up and asked, Mister, Are you the one who made that movie? Ethan smiled gently and nodded. She said nothing more, just held his hand for a moment, then ran off, as if nothing had happened. A week later, he received a letter. No return address. No name. Just a few trembling lines in handwriting. I was about to end my life, but through that wordless film, I remembered there's still something that knows, and I chose to live again. Ethan folded the letter and placed it on the table. No emotion, no pride, only the faintest smile, like light passing over the lake without disturbing the water. There was nothing more to do. No need to keep filming. No need to say anything else. Everything that needed to be shared had always been present. Ethan didn't retreat from the world. He didn't become a spiritual teacher. He simply continued living like an ordinary man. But everything was different now. Not because the world had changed, but because he was no longer the center of experience. He made tea, watched the steam rise, and smiled quietly, as if reality itself had just exhaled a silent poem. Those who met him would often say, "There's something very still in you." But he said nothing. There was no longer a need to share the truth, because the truth was already sharing itself, in his calm presence, in his listening, in his gaze that no longer sought to possess. Ethan had dissolved into life, the way salt dissolves into water. No one could see the salt anymore, but every drop of water now held the taste of awareness. Aham Brahmasmi, origin, meaning, and the Buddhist perspective. Prajnānam Brahma, consciousness is Brahman. There are statements that don't need explanation, only silence to be heard through. Prajnānam Brahma is one of them. It is one of the 4 Mahāvakyas, the 4 great sayings of Advaita Vedanta. For arrows aimed at piercing through ignorance, drawn from the oldest spiritual texts of humanity, the Vedas. Mahāvākya 1. Prajnānam Brahma, consciousness is Brahman. Aitareya Upanishad, Rig Veda. Mahāvākya 2. I am Brahmasmi, I am Brahman. Brahmanayaka Upanishad, Yajur Veda. Mahāvākya 3. Tat Tvam Asai, thou art that. Chandogya Upanishad, Sama Veda. Mahāvākya 4. I am Atma Brahma. This self is Brahman. Mandukya Upanishad, Atharva Veda. The statement Prajnānam Brahma appears in the Aitareya Upanishad, part of the Rig Veda, the most ancient of the 4. In its original context, this saying is uttered as a final revelation. After the seeker has passed through every layer of self, from the physical body to the mind, to arrive at the realization, there is nothing but pure consciousness. That is Brahman, the ultimate reality. Formless, limitless, needing no proof, only the knowing, which can never itself be known as an object. Shedding light on the Mahāvākya through the lens of Buddhism. Prajnānam Brahma, the Mahāvākya from the Aitareya Upanishad, can be translated as, pure consciousness is the ultimate reality. In the Vedantic tradition, this points to the truth that the deepest I is not the body, emotions, or thoughts, but the unchanging knowing, the witness of all change. Buddhism does not refer to this as Brahman, nor does it affirm the existence of a permanent, ultimate entity. But in deep meditation, when body and mind settle, and all conceptual noise dissolves, a quiet knowing appears, not to grasp, not to name, but to witness everything without interference. The Buddha called this sunyata, emptiness, where all phenomena arise without a fixed essence. It is also anatta, non-self, a knowing that does not belong to anyone. So whether from Vedanta or from Buddhism, whether named Brahman or emptiness, all paths, if followed to their depth, lead back to this very moment, this moment where you are hearing, but no one is hearing. And maybe, right now, you're already that knowing. Conclusion, like a breath. Maybe you too have once asked, who am I in this vast universe? The answer isn't in your thoughts. It lies in the awareness that is reading these words. No name, no shape, no coming, no going, and you have never been separate from it. If this story touched a quiet place within you, share it with someone who may have forgotten the light within themselves. Sparkles Prajnānam Brahma. Consciousness is Brahman, the unborn, undying knowing, the ground of all phenomena. I'm no longer the one who sees. I'm no longer what is seen. What remains is the light that sees through even the eye. I do not produce consciousness. I appear within it, before this body, before this name, these memories, these patchworks of life. There was something that was knowing. No words, no existence needed to prove existence. That is Brahman, not above, not out there, but here, in this very moment, through eyes that no longer carry a name.